Insane visuals on 95% THC distillate. Cannabis. This happened to me on a summer evening earlier this year. Some buddies and I were having a get-together, which pretty much always includes weed in one way or another. One of my friends announces that he copped 95% THC distillate, and that we would most certainly be smoking it. After smoking a couple bowls of grass, we each took our globs of distillate out of a dab rig, mine being a fairly well-sized glob. Shortly after smoking, I looked around and noticed that everything on the ground seemed much brighter, and the sky looked much darker. All of a sudden, one of the moments that I blink, all of the structures on the ground, buildings, trees, cars, etc., have a distinct white outline around them. I blinked again, and the effect persisted. After about 10 seconds of seeing this crazy effect, my vision suddenly cracks, or at least that's the best way I can describe it. White cracks of light appear in my vision for about 30 seconds, the buildings pulsing their white outline now. After that effect had passed, a little ball of bluish-white light appears in my vision. It was situated in about the same place where you would normally see afterimages in your eyes when you close your eyes after looking at a light. I thought this was a strange visual, but it just got stranger from there. The little ball of light stayed fixed in my vision for the remainder of the sesh, and as we went back inside to relax, I sat down on the couch and just sat staring at the powered-off, completely black TV. This anti-glare black surface made the visual even more prominent. As I stared directly into it, I noticed that there seemed to be the distinct pattern of those infinitely zooming in videos on a bunch of shapes. And as I continued staring at it, I noticed that I could see a line running through the ball of light. I then almost immediately noticed that the line coincided with the corner of the wall behind the TV. I freaked out, because I could so clearly see it. I asked my also well-toasted friend if he could see it as well, and told him to focus hard on the TV, and he remarkably said yes. I'm not sure if he was just humoring my high, but we were both losing it. Since then, every time I get high, I can focus in on my vision, and make the strange visual come back. I also noticed that it is much easier to see with your eyes closed, and that focusing on it is very similar to doing a magic eye puzzle. Try it sometime and let me know if you can see the same thing. Some of the things displayed while staring into the visual have been a large X that turns into an hourglass, a vast 3D space filled with pillars, strange shapes, most prominently the cube within a cube. I have not since been able to see the infinitely zooming in effect. Thanks for reading. First trip. Yikes. Cannabis. I've smoked weed exactly once in my life, and barely felt high from it, and it honestly just wasn't my cup of tea. I thought I'd never do it again, until my younger sister gave me an edible today, and had me eat it in front of her. She then left, leaving me home alone for the duration of this whole thing. I know next to nothing about any kind of drugs, but I trusted my sister wouldn't have left me alone if she thought I wasn't going to be okay. She didn't give me any info on the strength or amount the edible had, so unfortunately I can't say what it was. Huge mistake. It took an hour and a half to hit me, and for the next 3 hours I hallucinated worse than I ever have in my entire life, mental health shit. I nearly killed myself, because I felt like every move or thought I made was shifting me through multiple universes, and I would never be able to find my original universe. Everything was third person and terrifying, and the voices I normally have in my head went ballistic. I had no idea what to do, and no one to call, so I ended up chugging nearly a gallon of water in hopes it would help. I feel traumatized. I had a pretty extreme abusive home growing up, but during and still now after my trip I fervently believed that reliving my childhood 1000x over couldn't even come close to the suffering I was going through. So yeah. Never again LMAO. Might be dying psilocybin, cannabis and resin dabs report November 1, 28, 2020. Psilocybin. On a beautiful Saturday in November, my friend and I met up with my intent of tripping off some shrooms. After finishing a lemon tech extraction, I began to slowly sip from the Gatorade bottle which now contained about 2.5 grams of magic mushrooms, lemon juice, pomegranate juice and ginger paste for the infamous nausea. A little while later, we met up with my other friend, and we walked down to a local forested area, where him and I split the rest of the mushroom juice, as well as some raw stems and caps that I had saved. I had purchased 4G. After lighting up a couple of joints, we began making our way to another friend's place to borrow his blowtorch in order to hit some live resin in my friend's massive bong. When we returned to the neighborhood, we made our way to a back alley close to one of our houses and began setting up the dabbing equipment. I was excited but nervous, as this would be my first ever time taking a dab. At this point, I should mention that we were already moderately high from the JS and the shrooms, but being the weed lover I am, I decided that a dab hit wouldn't be all that different from a card hit. After taking a weak dry hit, we realized that the bong needed more water, and after filling it, it was handed to me as well as the resin jar, which I was told to use. After taking a huge hit, what I now realize was an ungodly amount of THC, I began coughing violently, while my head immediately began spinning. We were hitting the bong in the driveway of my friend's house, and I ended up stumbling back in between the car and the garage wall, after a car backing up almost scared the living piss out of me. At this point, realizing my error, I began apologizing to the first friend, whose resin it was. He laughed and said something like "It's all good DW." Meanwhile, I realized this was the least of my problems as reality began to literally distort and bend, complete with minor hearing loss and the telltale wah ear noises, which I believed was the result of my blood pressure lowering. As I cleaned and cooled off the banger, I realized that I was probably the most fucked up I'd ever been off weed. At this point, with all of my senses and perception completely thrown off, my friends decided it would be fun to go down to the park and shoot some hoops. I was convinced that I couldn't move, and when I got up, to my surprise I was a lot more articulate than I had thought. The visuals from what I believe was the dab were intense and borderline psychotic. I even thought that I had temporarily gone insane. Staring at my phone, the screen glitched and blurred. I now realized that my blood pressure had become so low, oxygen to my brain was depleted, and hence I began to experience hypoxia on top of being violently high. As we arrived at the park, I was becoming more and more intoxicated. In addition, I would try to walk straight, but it was like every time I tried to think or move, my whole consciousness would flicker between life and death like a candle. At this point, my heart sank into my stomach when I realized that I had forgotten how to breathe. This made the high become sinister and terrifying, and I soon realized that I had to relearn how to breathe normally while walking/playing basketball. After playing with the boys for a while, I staggered over to the curb and had to sit down. After shooting hoops for a while, we accidentally lost the ball in a ditch nearby. I really wanted to help my homies retrieve the ball, but there were points where I didn't know if I could even walk, let alone stand properly. I stumbled over to the ditch, and we soon got back to our game. At this point, I was too much in my head to notice what we were doing, but I believe we all walked into town, during which I was in a stupor, bumping into them, staggering drunkenly down the sidewalk in front of cars and people, and tripping over my own feet. In addition, I still had to make sure that I was still remembering to breathe and switching between my nose and mouth, which felt dangerously unusual. After a while, and by some miracle, we said our goodbyes, and I began tripping home, the whole time praying that the effects would die down soon. The next day, the afterglow from the shrooms was amazing, mostly because I was happy I survived to live another day, and I had a great day at work, although I was exhausted from the previous night's dab. First time with a dab cart. Crazy experience. Cannabis. So I just recently got into cannabis. For a while I have been vaping and wanted to try something new, as I was sort of having a dry spell in my life, so I decided to get a dab cart, or whatever they are called now. I did not go to a dispensary to get it, and I know I am a dumbass for doing so, but it is what it is, and it is already done. The cart I got was from Glow, and it was their hybrid Sunday Driver 1G. Technically this was my second time with a cannabis product, and my first time smoking was with a swisher packed with weed. I had that thing where I did not get high my first time, I was sort of just energetic if anything. So now to the trip itself. As it is my first time with a cart, I decided to go a little bit farther and hit it at 5 volts, which I believe has a lot to do with why my high was so crazy. Unless of course most low-tolerance weed highs are like this IDK. After one 11-second hit, while sucking everything in for 15 seconds, I felt pretty buzzed immediately, so I of course decided to take another smaller hit. This hit was about 6 seconds and I immediately started to feel the effects. I was wheezing after those 2 hits for about a minute, so I laid down for 15 minutes, it's 11:30 p.m., and then pulled out my phone and put in my noise-canceling headphones and began to search up the music video Fast by Juice WRLD, as he is one of my favorite artists, RIP, and I heard it was a great experience watching that vid. I put all my effort into pushing away my insane anxiety that I had been experiencing for the past 10 minutes and forced myself to keep my eyes open because I thought my cart was laced with heroin. Extremely unlikely, I know, but the media puts all this bullshit in my brain that my anxiety brought back, and I was scared out of my mind. I mean, what are the possibilities of lacing a cheap drug with a more expensive drug, SMH? So now to the music video part of my high. This shit was fucking insane. Holy shit, I was just vibing. I felt like someone kept throwing like a 100 decibel bass drop into my chest that spread to my whole entire body over and over and over again. It was unbelievably amazing. Every 10 seconds or so my anxiety would try to pull me to some sort of land of terror, but I would just look at the screen and instantly, bam, some craziest vibration just went through my whole entire body. I felt like I was literally one with the music itself. I would get just a 5-second burst of energy that make me bend forward and then dance like I'm fucking living my best life. Then I guess I eventually lost concentration on the video and drifted into my own world, and then my phone probably auto shut off eventually, and then came the audio hallucinations. Almost the exact same thing that was happening with the music video happened with the song I had started to imagine that was playing. I was still feeling those vibrations through my whole body, although they were a bit easier on me this time around. I did also have tracers and I did have extremely minor sevs. They were nothing compared to the stuff I hear about on here and other subreddits. The cottonmouth was horrible, and it was almost impossible to drink out of a water bottle. I was shaking like crazy and my eyes were obviously bloodshot. But one of the best, but at the same time the worst part of everything was my subconscious talking to me. That shit was some crazy stuff. The reason why it was so bad is because it brought on a shit ton of anxiety. I kept telling myself that this shit is laced, and that I could die the next time I hit it, and that I should just go back to the good little Christian kid that I used to be. I have never experienced ego death, and I don't really understand it, but maybe this was similar. I kept telling myself over and over and over again what a fucking disappointment I was to my family and friends, and then I actually started thinking I was mentally disabled and my parents and friends never told me. I then started thinking that the whole world revolved around me, and then that transitioned into the audio visuals, and I just rode that wave out, and then I fell asleep. One last thing about the trip that I would like to come back to is those vibrations or bass drops that shook my whole body. That might just be the craziest thing of it all, and when I got those waves of vibrations I could feel my entire heart rate and started thinking that this was it, and that I was going to die. It was terrifying but so amazing. I felt like I was 15 different people in one body. I guess that makes sense since I'm so fake in real life. Then I woke up the next day super worn out and tired and a bit nauseous. Has anybody else ever had an experience like this with cannabis? Also Sray for being pretty illiterate. Extremely intense marijuana high. Cannabis. Story starts at about 10 p.m. At this time, I smoke a little bit of a hemp blunt that I rolled the previous day. I wait another 30 minutes to see how high I get. My high was very weak, so I smoke the rest of the hemp blunt, 10:30 p.m. I head to my bed and wait for the high to fully kick in. At about 11 p.m., I have auditory hallucinations, pitches changing high to low, brain focusing on one sound and dramatizing it. I close my eyes and I actually have slight CEVs, which I have never really noticed on any psychedelic previously. I see shapes converge and explode into mandalas and kaleidoscope shapes faintly. At this point, my heart rate was increasing pretty drastically, and it felt like my nostrils were closing up, so I did my best to distract myself from anxiety by watching TV. I found myself forgetting what characters were saying and hearing their voices echo in my head. I looked around and shadows and shapes were more pronounced in my room. I tried to get the psychedelic headspace that you typically get with tripping, but it didn't happen, because weed isn't really a psychedelic. I find it very odd that weed gives me such severe effects, almost to the point that it's unbelievable. I don't smoke very often, but I have always sorta noticed these effects when I smoke, apart from the CEVs. That was very odd. TLDR, smoked weed had CEVs, auditory hallucinations, slight OEVs, but no psychedelic headspace.